Hi, class. So, welcome back to our module here in Survey of Criminal Theories. We have made it through looking at the bulk and what is arguably the most important part of this course, which are the criminal theories. So now we want to go back to typologies of crime. And this is where I say the fun begins, because we're going to talk about some crimes and talk about some offenses that really get people interested and really get people focused on, they really speak to the core of what criminology is. Because if we have theories which can explain criminal behavior and criminal activity, well, I think it's important for us to start talking about certain types of crimes and tie it always back to theory, right? So if you've taken another CJ course or criminal justice course or wherever you are, some of this may be familiar, but we also want to focus on tying this to theory. So we're in chapter 10, and this lecture, when I lecture on this in person, it's actually about a 2.5 week lecture. That's how much material there is. So I'm condensing it into 2 parts. I cut a lot of it out, but I still hope that you'll find it enjoyable and very informative. So let's jump right in, shall we? Let's start off with violence. What is violence? Do you have words that you would use to associate with violence? So you're looking at this lecture, you've been following along for several weeks, and we're talking about violence. Well, here are many of the words associated with violence. Someone who's being aggressive. Think about blood or bloody, fighting. Someone who's hot-headed or has a temper. Someone who's vicious or maybe enjoys conducting beatings. Or a person who's homicidal. These are just a few of the words that you and many of my former students have used to discuss what it means to be violent or engage in violence. And if we're looking at violence, by definition, it's a behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. It is a very strong emotion or an unpleasant or destructive natural force. So violence being a behavior, if a person is exhibiting violent traits or violent tendencies, that's a behavior in which they want to hurt, damage, or even kill someone. That's dangerous, right? It's very dangerous. And we're going to see as we go through this lecture and as we talk about interpersonal violence in this part and then in the second part, that individuals who are engaging in interpersonal violence and they're engaging in certain violent acts, it's a behavior, and these are behaviors that absolutely can be tied to theory. So violence can take 2 forms. It can be expressive. It's designed not for profit or gain, but to vent rage, anger, or frustration, killing a person just because. Sometimes people just act just because. Now, we can tie this directly to trait theory, right? Because with trait theory, there's an abnormal psychological trait that causes someone to engage in crime. So in this case, expressive violence could simply be a manifestation of trait theory. Something is abnormally wrong in that person's brain. But there's also instrumental violence. It's used in a rational, hint, hint, rational choice theory, rational, controlled, and purposeful fashion. For example, an armed robbery or murder for hire. And so with this chapter, we're going to look at what are some of the causes of violent crimes? What are some other types of interpersonal violence? We will have a discussion on the sensitive topic of rape/sexual assault. We'll talk about murder and homicide, and we'll get to about half of murder and homicide in this lecture, and then we'll pick up talking about assault and battery, robbery, and then, of course, some hate crimes and other contemporary crimes, including stalking and workplace violence. There's a lot of material. This is why I love this chapter, and I tell everybody, get through 6 weeks of theory, because when we come back, buckle up. We're about to have a lot of fun talking about stuff that you really, really want to talk about, and what better way to kick it off than talking about interpersonal violence. We all have strong opinions, and there's a lot of supplemental videos I put in my lecture to drive home this force. This is why I usually lecture on this for about 2 weeks. So, what causes someone to behave violently? Well, criminologists believe that it is a function of human traits and makeup. Others point to socialization and upbringing. But here are some of the factors which cause violence. Personal traits. In other words, what does a person's what does a person's makeup, their personal traits, their personality, what are those traits that causes them to engage in crime personally? There's evolutionary factors, human instinct. Since prehistory, man was designed to be violent, designed to be aggressive. Men were designed to be aggressive and violent. If you think back to early ancient history, that's how men behaved. But evolutionary factors. Sometimes we didn't really evolve, and we have this human instinct that violence is the answer. It's the only way to solve a problem. What about being exposed to violence? Do you have violent movies? Violent video games? Like, I'm in my theater room, as you've been seeing all semester, and I'm like, man, I should have just grabbed some violent movies off my movie shelf, or a couple of violent video games. But what about the exposure to violence? Now, there's a horror movie out there called In a Violent Nature, and I hear that it is a very violent horror movie. And I'm a horror movie guy. I love horror movies. I haven't seen that one yet. It came out last year. It is on my to-watch list, but I hear it's very, very violent. And if I'm not mistaken, it's a first-person horror movie, which is rare, but it's shot from the perspective of the killer. So you can't be 12, 13, 14 years old watching a movie like that and not have something potentially trigger or something that makes the person become violent. Here are some other ones: socialization and upbringing. We talked about social structure theory, which are the neighborhoods, the ecological makeup, social disorganization theory, broken windows theory. But we also talked about social process theory. What are the factors? What are the bonds that keep people from engaging in crime? What about social learning theory? Do individuals learn crime much the same way as they learn other things in life, like how to go to school, how to drive, how to study for tests, or interactions with peers? What about upbringing? The fact that sometimes parents may teach, hey, that boy over there hit you, stop all that crying. You need to go kick his butt, or don't come home if you get beat up. These are things that are often said in certain cultures, and certainly when it comes to children. Cultural values, subculture of violence. Think about the subculture of violence, which inherently says that we are just a violent country. We're a violent nature. We're a violent country. We are a violent nation. Right now, we have protests in Los Angeles. As of the time of this lecture, we have protests going on in Los Angeles. We have protests that are going to be striking all over the country in the next couple of days. Stay tuned, watch the news, because things might get violent. And then, of course, substance abuse. If you take certain types of drugs, there are drugs out there that will make people more violent than other substances. Maybe make you see things that aren't there, make you completely freak out and lose your mind, and that may cause someone to engage in violent behavior. So we're going to talk about rape, and rape is a very sensitive and it's a difficult topic. I put in my lectures, and I do this in my in-person classes, is what really highlights my in-person classes, the ability to talk about sensitive topics from a perspective of, while I am a man and I do not know or fully understand the gravity of what this means, especially for my women and young ladies, but I stand in solidarity with women. I stand in solidarity with my female students in that if they have experienced any form of assault, that's not okay. It's never, ever okay. And so with that being said, in my in-person classes, I do put the warning disclaimer sign. It is just a reminder that we are talking about something a little bit more sensitive. But again, I want to reassure all of my students and those who are watching that anytime I talk about something that is sensitive, it is 100% done with great sensitivity, and it is done with great care for the emotions of the person that is that may be watching or partaking in it. So when we look at our traditional common law definition, it's the carnal knowledge and physical act of a female forcibly and against her will. Essentially, what this breaks down to is a man taking a woman forcibly. Now, that was traditional common law definition. This type of assault would only be committed against women, period. Contemporary statutes say that it's gender neutral, and it can include other acts of penetration. With it being gender neutral, it could be a man against a woman, of course. It could be a woman against a man. It could be a man against a man. It could be a woman against a woman. So contemporary statutes simply just, anytime you hear the word contemporary class, it just means modern times. But criminologists view it as a crime of violence, a coercive act of aggression, and not an expression of sexuality. And the reason why it's seen as a crime of violence and not an expression of sexuality is simply because there's a power dynamic. We're going to get to this power dynamic in just a little bit. But generally speaking, individuals who engage in this type of behavior are not doing so for the purposes of sexual pleasure or gratification. So this led to me having a great discussion in class about this major issue. Why is it that celebrities and people with fame and power have gotten away with it for so long? And some of the answers that I've gotten include, well, one, because when you have celebrity and power, a person is more likely to submit to their will because they know that this person with power can bury them before they get started. Harvey Weinstein, right now, literally today, the day I'm doing this lecture, he is on trial in, I believe, New York City. The jury came back guilty on one count, not guilty on another, and on the third count, the judge ordered them to keep trying to come up with a verdict. But it's all based on what he's done. And Harvey Weinstein was one of the most powerful, arguably the most powerful man in Hollywood. Diddy, Sean Diddy Combs, I have not referred to him in my other class. He's currently on trial in New York City. Years and years and years of significant abuse and atrocious crimes have finally come to roost because he was a person in a lot of power, and according to testimony, whether you believe it or not, told people he can absolutely make it to where they would never, ever work in New York City or in LA again. So, with that being said, individuals speaking up about celebrities, speaking up about people like Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, a lot of other people, R. Kelly, and even Diddy, it's because of this, the Me Too movement. Me Too is so not a fad. It's a revolution of truth and consequences. Women today, men today are brave enough to speak up and say, that happened to me too. Wait, it happened to you? It happened to me too. And this movement is still going on. People are speaking up. Right now, my favorite football team, the Baltimore Ravens, cut arguably the most accurate kicker in NFL history because massage therapists spoke up about his behavior 5-6 years ago. He's denied it. He's been adamant. He's been fiery. But at the end of the day, hey, if he did what they allege that he did, there's no place for him in the NFL, period. People are not afraid, and they are speaking up saying, me too. So in terms of incidents of rape, when looking at some considerations, the Uniform Crime Report talks about there's about 90,000 assaults reported to law enforcement each year. I hate to say that, class. That number is so low. That number is so low. Because while there's 90,000 reported, there are hundreds of thousands that go unreported. It's a very small number of assaults that are reported each year. It is a warm weather crime, occurs definitely in the July-August month, June to an extent. Right now, as the time of this lecture, it is June. Why are rates lowest in December, January, and February? It's cold. People are staying inside. People aren't meandering around outside trying to go from place to place or potentially break into a residence to assault somebody. They are staying inside. Whereas these warm weather months, people are on the go, people are on the beach, people are wearing less clothing. There's a lot of factors that contribute to why it is a warm weather crime. Also, has higher rates in major metropolitan areas. So if you think about all the major cities in this country, Miami, LA, New York City, Detroit, Atlanta, Chicago, Philly, Denver, San Francisco. I mean, you name a major city in this country, and they are going to have ridiculously high rates of sexual assault compared to maybe a suburb, for example. Maybe Happy Valley, where Penn State is. I'm just using that as an example, or some other small time, city or town. And again, I just threw that out. I don't know if Happy Valley is a big place, but generally speaking, it's not going to be high compared to Philly or Pittsburgh, which are major cities in this country. And then, of course, the National Crime Victimization Survey data talks about how there's nearly 443,000 sexual assaults. This data was taken from the 2022 survey year, which is an increase from the 2021 survey data. But again, we only see 90,000 rapes reported criminally. So we're not even at half. We're not even really at, 1/4. We're talking almost 1/5 of all sexual assaults are reported to police. That's highly problematic. So when looking at the types of individuals who commit these offenses, A. Nicholas Groth was a criminologist who really focused on rapists and people who perpetuate and commit sexual assaults. And what he found was the vast majority of them fell into these two categories, the anger and power category. The sadist is very, very minimal. That's the person that does it just to inflict pain or humiliate the victim. Very, very rare. And we think about serial killers, and we'll talk about serial killers. I believe we'll get to serial killers in the next lecture. So just stay tuned. Don't fall off the train. We'll talk about it in the next lecture, part 2 of this. But as you can see, anger and power take up the vast majority of people who commit this type of offense. And as you see, power, they're doing it for nothing more than power reasons. They want to possess the victim sexually. They want control, and they want to exhibit and exert some measure of control and power over the victim. Whereas anger, those individuals committed due to anger and their frustration. They could be frustrated for any reasons. In fact, we can even argue strain theory, right? Maybe they're frustrated because they don't have the same economic means or the ability to attain the same economic means that everyone else has, mainstream society has, and so they were angry. But either way, they're still committing a sexual assault, which is very, very wrong, and which is a crime of violence as opposed to sexual gratification. So what are some types of rapes? Date rape. This is just when people are in a form of a courting relationship. They could be dating each other. They could be kind of going steady. Maybe they've gone out for a few dates. Maybe they are in a steady relationship, but that's a date rape. Rape on campus. I constantly talk about the college lifestyle. What are some danger zones on the college campuses? Being in certain parts of campus where there's not enough lighting, being around large groups on campus where you might have more men, or being in isolated places on campus, especially late at night. Don't be walking from the library at 2 a.m. and there's nobody out and it's very dark. So you have to think about rape on campus and why is it so prevalent? What are the reasons? Well, for starters, one reason why it's so prevalent is because you're getting all these folks who have been home for all these years. Now they get the taste of freedom that they think they can do whatever they want. And the other side of that coin is alcohol. Alcohol plays a pivotal role in a sexual assault. I talk about this in my victimology class, so if you're listening to this lecture and you're like, man, I want to hear more from Professor Fields, sign me up for victimology. You got to see when it's offered again. But victimology, I do discuss how alcohol plays a pivotal, in fact, it is the most pivotal and crucial role when it comes to a sexual assault or a rape on campus. So I want to show you what are some of the most dangerous campuses. And as you see, this is data taken from 2019 to 2021. It'll probably take a few years for them to do 2022 to 2024, maybe 25. It depends. But look at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I mean, the prevalence of violent crimes on campus, and that includes sexual assault. It's almost 3 times what their second place team is, which ironically is their rival, Ohio State. But you see right here, you got the University of Iowa, you have Stanford University, Texas A&M, Penn State University. Those numbers are a lot lower. We can go down the list a little bit and we can see we have Auburn University, Texas Tech, 96, University of Arizona is 87. Look, my alma mater, University of Florida, has 87 incidents of violence on campus. So the reason why this information is in here is because schools are required under the Clery Act, the Clery Act, C-L-E-R-Y, the Clery Act. And I talk about it in victimology, so we're not going to worry about it in this class. But the Clery Act requires universities and colleges to dispel and to divulge incidents of violence, sexual assault, murder, any other form of crime on campus, so that way parents and students will know what they're up against when they come to the college or university. They are required, federally mandated, by September 30th of each year, they must release their annual report. And I have one. It's about maybe 80 pages. You have to really know what you're looking for to find the meat and potatoes of the information on how violent it is and what types of crimes are committed on campus. Other types of rape, marital rape. Many wives are assaulted by their husbands. That is still very real, especially in other countries, but it does happen here in America. Statutory rape, sexual relations between an underage minor female and an adult male, or vice versa. When we see an older male with an underage female, we see it a lot of times where there is a form of grooming. They're potentially grooming that young woman, and then that's how they get caught up. When we see it where it's an older woman and a younger man, it's usually a teacher who has befriended that young boy and has decided to engage in a sexual relationship with that young boy. But it does happen. We also have rape by deception. This one is very rare, but this could be like if two people were in a relationship, maybe they're at a party, the lights are out, they're getting together, and somebody does something against the other person's knowledge. Or one of the most notable ones is there was a real case where a man, he did a swap out with his twin, and the twin was engaging in relations with the man's girlfriend. She found out, and of course she was absolutely disgusted, because why would you swap your twin in for you? And then of course section authority relations. This is where it comes down to the quid pro quo, where a person who's a supervisor, boss, teacher, professor, whatever, says, if you do this, I will take care of you. If you do something for me, I will take care of you. And that something for me definitely involves something explicit, so to speak. So in terms of our causes of rape, the male socialization argues that rape is a function of socialization, and men have been socialized to be aggressive with women. This also comes up with upbringing. One of the theories that comes to mind is the social process theory, because think about who your connections are. Think about how individuals process their behavior, process their emotions. But process theory comes to mind because it's based on socialization, how they interact with other people. What is the socialization? Then the psychological abnormality. Sometimes they've undergone a traumatic childhood. It's underscored by sexual abuse, parental detachment. Maybe they suffer from personality disorders. They have hostile and sadistic emotions towards women. The reason why I say trait theory is because there's an abnormal psychological trait that may cause them to engage in this type of behavior. Social learning. One of the theories that comes to mind is social learning theory. Men learn to commit these types of offenses much the same way they learn any other behavior. So, for example, this aggression may be learned. It's usually learned through interaction with peers or others who deem the behavior as acceptable. So they've learned to do this. They didn't just know how to commit an assault. They didn't know what to do, how to take somebody, how to make someone submit to their will. They learned it from somebody and they are carrying out what they've learned. And then as women make progress towards social, political, and economic equality, men fear them as a threat to their long-held dominance. This is the gender conflict view. It does sound a little bit like critical feminist theory as well, because men will see women making these gains and women having advances in society as a power play on their territory and on their progress. And so they sometimes want to try to knock women down. And one way to knock a woman down from a man's perspective is to assault them, show that there's power over them, so to speak. In terms of sexual motivation, age does matter. Older individuals who engage in sexual assault and rape, they are generally doing it because of power. They want to show that they have power. Younger people like Brock Turner, this despicable, horrible person that you see on your screen, he's doing it because he just wanted to have fun. And you've previously saw the video with Brock Turner a couple of modules ago, where literally he got 6 months in jail, and he's a free man, even though he lives in Ohio, for what a judge amounted to saying 60 seconds of fun. That's how they treated the victim at the time, Jane Doe. But again, for Brock Turner, his age, being a young man, college athlete, for him, it was all about sexual motivation, sexual pleasure. For older people, it's about exerting and exhibiting power. So proving rape can definitely be difficult. The media, when they're involved, we already know that when the media gets wind of it, you're dealing with the media circus that comes with the territory. You're also dealing with the fact that what if it was considered consensual? We commonly hear that when it comes to celebrities and people in positions of power. Well, this was consensual. I didn't do anything wrong. We agreed that this was going to be okay, and it probably was never talked about, or the person could have been significantly intoxicated, and in their moment of intoxication, they gave in. But it does happen. What about, was it victim precipitated? Can they prove that the act was forced and not voluntary? What about misidentification and fabricated stories? People do lie. DNA has oftentimes exonerated people for lies, but the damage is done when you are accused of being a rapist or someone who's committed sexual assault. Nobody's going to want to work with you. Nobody's going to want to be around you. It is very, very real. And so it's important to know that proving it can be very challenging in court. Oftentimes the courts do not want to, they don't usually want to deal with these cases. They will, but generally speaking, there's a lot that can happen. Someone can recant or change their story. They can go ahead and not cooperate. They can even say nothing happened. You guys are being overzealous. It is a very difficult case to prove, sometimes in a court of law. And so lastly, think about consent and legal reform as it comes to this topic. What about the burden of proof? The burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. Can a prosecutor prove beyond the exclusion of a reasonable doubt that a person engaged in sexual relations with another person and that it was not consensual, right? It becomes a very difficult task, and you get victim blaming, you get shame. Sometimes the victim even has to be the one to prove that they did not encourage, entice, or mislead the offender. But legal reforms are out there. Shield laws protect women from being questioned about their sexual history. So women can't be put on the spot about their sexual exploits. And also, what about this whole bystander effect, right? Can we punish somebody if they choose not to act? Or are you given a duty to act? So it's important for us to understand and know that within sexual assault, rape, there are some protections in place, but people have to be keenly aware that the onus is on you to decide whether or not you're going to intervene if you saw someone being attacked. So we're done with rape, sexual assault. Now let's go ahead and quickly talk about murder. I just have a few slides and then we're going to pause here because, as I said, this is a long lecture that I had to break up in multiple parts. In class, we would have stopped with sexual assault, rape. But in this case, we're going to keep going and we'll talk a little bit about homicide and then we'll pick up in part 2 to finish off homicide. So, murder is the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. In other words, murder, simply put, is the killing of one human being by another human being. It is our most serious common law crime that we have in the United States. It is the only crime that is punishable by death, PBD, punishable by death. But to legally prove a murder has taken place, jurisdictions have to require prosecutors show that the accused maliciously intended to kill the victim. When we talk about malicious intent, we don't mean that this was an accident. We don't mean that this was done other than to absolutely end the person's life, maliciously killing the individual. And so 2 types of malice exist: express or actual malice, the state of mind, and then implied or constructive malice, when the death results from negligent or unthinkable behavior. So when we look at the express malice, that state of mind assumed to exist when someone kills another person. What frame of mind were they in? Were they even thinking clearly? Did they even know what they were doing? What was going through their head? But the implied or constructive malice is when the death results from negligent or unthinkable behavior. Negligent behavior being, I didn't think to slow down because I didn't think driving 110 miles an hour could kill somebody. That's negligent behavior. Whereas if we looked at express malice, and you know you're going to drive 80 miles an hour with the intent to run somebody over because you're actively looking for someone to run over, that's actual malice. It's not implied. So in terms of our degrees of murder, we have first degree murder, which offers premeditation, malice aforethought. It's a very deliberate crime. It was committed with a blatant disregard for human life. That is what first degree murder is. That is usually punishable by life in prison in most cases, and in some cases it's punishable by death. Then we have second degree murder. This lacks premeditation. There was an intent to cause harm, but did not necessarily plan to kill. You beat somebody so badly that they died. You're probably getting second degree murder because you didn't intend to kill them. A court of law can typically discern whether or not you intended to kill them, but in the course of you beating them and beating them and beating them, a reasonable person had to assume eventually, due to the significant blows they're taking or the stabs or whatever they're taking, they're eventually going to die. So that's why it's second degree murder. We also have manslaughter, voluntary non-negligent, involuntary negligent. Voluntary non-negligent manslaughter would be like somebody running someone over, like they weren't paying attention, they were driving, they ran somebody over, right? Maybe they were highly intoxicated. That's a voluntary action, to be drinking enough alcohol to the point of intoxication and then getting behind the wheel. It's a voluntary event. You didn't have to do it. Whereas an involuntary negligent manslaughter would be, you're driving down the street, you shouldn't be on your phone, you're paying attention, and then just for a split second you drop your phone, you took your eyes off the road, and you hit somebody. That's going to be involuntary, because even though you dropped your phone and there's probably going to be some aggravating factors based on you messing with your phone, you didn't intend to hit anybody. You just took your eyes off the road for a second, and that 1 second resulted in someone's passing. Deliberate indifference is also argued. This is when a person is held criminally liable for the death of another person, even if he or she did not intend to injure the other person. The problem with the deliberate indifference is that you have a standard that has to be met. So, for example, there's a disregard for an excessive risk to another person's health or safety. The excessive risk can include having very vicious dogs, and you know these dogs are quite vicious because they've been trained as such, and you keep them in a place where they can get out and potentially harm and attack children. Or you have poisonous snakes in your home or your apartment, you didn't let the rental office know, and then the snakes got out and they're going through the vents, and they may be showing up in other people's apartments. Like that's a deliberate indifference. So since 1991, why has the murder rate been going up even though it was steadily declining? Well, the reason is because there's access to firearms. Not to mention, we're very quickly tempered. Have you ever seen this movie called Unhinged? I don't know if you've seen it, but go look at the trailer. But I saw it a couple of weeks ago, and boy, oh boy, was Russell Crowe unhinged. The man was absolutely nuts. And all of this started because he was honked at on the freeway in whatever state they were in. So people are very quick-tempered. Not to mention, people have access to firearms. So I want to go ahead and talk about some other types of murder as we get ready to kind of wrap it up. So we have some types of murders. Infanticide. Infanticide is the murder of a very young child. Then we have filicide, the murder of an older child. We have eldercide, the murder of a senior citizen. So when you hear elder, you know that's going to talk about someone that's senior. And then we have feticide. That's the endangering or killing of an unborn fetus. So feticide or fetus. One that's getting a lot of attention right now, especially with what's happening in the world, is genocide. And genocide is the murder of many people from a particular nation or ethnic group. Typically, they share a same ethnicity, nationality, religion, etc. So obviously the most notable instance of genocide in American and world history was Hitler's extermination of Jews in concentration camps in the late 1930s and 40s, which ultimately even though he was exterminating Jews, the United States didn't get involved in World War II until Pearl Harbor was bombed on December 7th. So once that happened, that's when the United States got involved and World War II was raging. But typically, the most notable instance of genocide in history was Hitler exterminating Jews. Another one included Pol Pot destroying millions of Cambodians. But one that we should ask ourselves right now are, what about what's happening in the Middle East? What about what's happening in Ukraine and with Russia? Like, are those genocides as well? You have to be the judge based on where you stand and how you hear the argument from either side. So with murderous relations, there's intimate partner murders. That's murder where your intimate partner, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your significant other, your spouse, they go ahead and they are the ones who execute the person. Acquaintance murders, think about how people have acquaintances, strange acquaintances, somebody they just met, somebody that they've been talking to, but they're not like intimately linked to them, but they are an acquaintance. They are a potential, maybe they're somebody they work with, etc. Stranger murders, that's just a completely random act of murder. The most notable one happened right here in Georgia. Right here in Georgia. Jose Ibarra took out and killed Laken Riley, a student at the University of Georgia, randomly. Sexually based murders based on sexual gratification, and of course school murders. And some of these schools I have talked about in other courses, and I have a homicide class where I dedicate one whole chapter or lecture, so to speak, because we had no book, to talking about mass shootings and in school-based violence. So, Columbine, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, etc. Those are some of the most infamous school shootings ever in our society. So we're going to stop right there. That is our stopping point. When we pick up, we're going to continue talking about murder and homicide, but we're going to talk about a topic that everyone seems to enjoy because it's fascinating. And because we do have an obsession with serial killers. So yeah, we're going to talk about serial killers next lecture. All right, take care, and I'll see you next time.